I was just in the White House in an Oval Office meeting between President Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa.
In February 2025, the world woke to a geopolitical bombshell. With a single executive order, U.S. President Donald Trump froze all American aid to South Africa, accusing its government of human rights violations and aligning with hostile powers. This wasn't a subtle diplomatic nudge. It was a sledgehammer, instantly halting decades of U.S. support for health, development, and trade programs. The move shocked Pretoria, rippled across Africa, and left global observers reeling. The order's scope was staggering. It didn't just pause aid, it branded South Africa a violator of human rights, citing its Expropriation Act of 2024 as discriminatory and pointing to its ICJ case against Israel as evidence of defiance. In a dramatic twist, Trump directed the State Department to create refugee pathways for white Afrikaner farmers, framing them as victims of persecution under South Africa's land reforms. Overnight, a domestic policy became an international crisis, with the U.S. expelling South Africa's ambassador and Congress pushing sanctions on Pretoria's officials. The fallout was immediate. South Africa, a key recipient of U.S. aid, particularly through PEPFAR's HIV/AIDS programs, faced a grim reality. Clinics braced for medicine shortages, patients feared treatment disruptions, and industries tied to U.S. trade via AGOA worried about tariffs. The rand weakened, inflating food and fuel prices. South Africans took to the streets, their placards reading, "Our land, our choice," and "Africa is not your colony." The mood wasn't defeat, it was defiance, fueled by a history of colonial dispossession. The roots of the land dispute. To understand this clash, we must dig into South Africa's land question, a wound centuries in the making. Colonial conquest stripped indigenous communities of fertile land, pushing them into barren reserves. The 1913 Land Act under apartheid cemented this theft, reserving most arable land for white owners. By 1994, when apartheid fell, over 80% of farmland remained in white hands, despite black South Africans forming the majority. Land reform was a promise of liberation, but the willing buyer, willing seller model moved at a snail's pace. By 2017, only 10% of farmland had been redistributed, leaving millions landless and trapped in poverty. Enter the Expropriation Act of 2024. This law allows the state to seize land for public purposes, like addressing inequality, with compensation as the default but nil compensation, possible in cases of abandoned or underused land. Every case faces judicial review, ensuring legality. It's not a racial land grab, as some claim, but a constitutional tool to fix historical wrongs. Yet in the US, it's been spun as reverse apartheid, with Afrikaner farmers cast as victims. This narrative ignores the millions of black South Africans still locked out of land ownership, living in the shadow of apartheid's geography. The philosophical divide is clear. South Africa sees land reform as justice for centuries of theft. The US frames it as an attack on property rights, ignoring its own use of eminent domain for projects like highways, often with minimal compensation. Why the double standard? Some argue it's about control. If South Africa proves a post-colonial state can redress history through law, it challenges Western narratives that prioritize property over justice. This isn't just about land, it's about who gets to write the rules. The human cost of sanctions sound noble, defending rights, ensuring accountability, but their weight falls on the vulnerable, not the powerful. PEPFAR's funding has saved millions of South Africans from HIV/AIDS. Now, with aid frozen, clinics face dwindling supplies, outreach workers risk unpaid wages, and patients fear empty shelves. In rural provinces where health infrastructure is fragile, this isn't geopolitics, it's life or death. A patient waiting for antiretrovirals doesn't care about Washington's principles, they need their pills. Economically, the sanctions threaten South Africa's industries. Wine, citrus, and auto sectors rely on AGOA's trade access. Tariffs could devastate farmers and manufacturers, while small businesses face frozen investments. The rand's dip post-sanctions spiked inflation, hitting ordinary South Africans with higher costs for basics like bread and fuel. Sanctions meant to protect rights are eroding the livelihoods of those they claim to defend. Geopolitical boomerang: Washington's move may backfire. By weaponizing aid, the U.S. pushes South Africa toward alternatives. Pretoria is already eyeing Chinese credit lines, Russian energy deals, and BRICS development funds. Historically, sanctions have driven African nations to new partners. Think 1960s Soviet ties or China's 2000s loans to Ethiopia. Today, South Africa's pivot could dilute U.S. influence, aligning it with powers Washington seeks to counter. The irony? Sanctions meant to punish may strengthen the very alliances the U.S. fears. This standoff exposes a deeper truth: dependency is a liability. Africa's response is diversification, through the African Continental Free Trade Area, regional payment systems, and security pacts. These homegrown tools aim to reduce reliance on Western approval. With China as Africa's top trader and Russia, Turkey, and India circling, South Africa isn't isolated. It's got options. This shift changes the global bargaining table, giving Africa leverage it's rarely had. A new African resolve. South Africa's defiance strikes a chord across the continent. As Africa's industrial powerhouse and a G20 member, its stance carries weight. From Lagos to Nairobi, people are asking, can Africa make its own choices without Western vetoes? Young Africans, skeptical of Western benevolence, see Pretoria's resolve as a model. Aid comes with strings, trade with conditions, and partnerships often mask exploitation. South Africa's pushback makes sovereignty feel urgent, not just a slogan. The sanctions may have sparked an unintended African renaissance. By standing firm, South Africa signals that the continent can say no and survive. If Pretoria weathers this storm, securing new funding, maintaining trade, rebuilding diplomacy, it could shatter the myth that defying the West means collapse. Other African nations are watching. A successful stand could embolden them to demand respect as equals, not pawns. The stakes ahead. This crisis isn't just about land or aid, it's about Africa's place in the world. Can the continent write its own destiny, free from external scripts? South Africa's response will set a precedent. Success means clinics stay open, trade finds new markets, and sovereignty becomes tangible. Failure risks reinforcing the idea that Africa can't afford defiance. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every protest sign in Johannesburg, every diplomatic move in Pretoria, carries weight beyond borders. This isn't about Trump's order alone. It's about whether Africa's future is decided in Washington or in African capitals like Addis Ababa and Lagos. The continent is finding its voice and the world is listening. What do you think? Are these sanctions about human rights? Or are they punishment for South Africa's independence? Should Africa keep relying on aid that can vanish overnight? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories on Black culture, history, and resilience, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We're bringing you the narratives that matter. Tales of a glorious past and a defiant future. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.